Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand of the company Hornswoden. And before we get into today's show, I do have to do the same housekeeping that we do every time. I know a lot of people will be sick of hearing it, but it's the way we keep the lights on. It's how we keep the podcast going, and that's through our Patreon. Patreon.com/Nordic Mythology podcast. It starts from £3 a month, so that works out about 10p a day. Like buying me a cup of coffee. Well, it's cheaper than buying me one cup of coffee a month, and you get a whole host of different bonus episodes. So you do the one that we're doing today, which is our creator episode, where you get to listen to a little bit extra with a creator from, I'm going to say, the widened kind of Nordic Viking sphere. It's just somebody who makes something really cool, and then we take an in-depth look at how they do things. Sometimes they'll show us how they do them. They're really interesting. And then you also get the Q&A we do with our guests every single week. And then we throw some extra storytime episodes in there as well. There's a whole bunch of stuff on there. So if you do get a chance, please just go over to Patreon.com/Nordic Mythology podcast, and you get the back catalogue. So it's not just from when you sign up going forward, you get everything. So at this point, there's years of bonus material that you can listen to. Like I say, it starts from £3 a month. So we really do appreciate it. And if you can't do that, even just a like, share, and just a like, share, and a positive review wherever you get the podcast. It might just help somebody else find the podcast. But yeah, let's get into today's show. So as I said, today is one of our creator episodes. These ones are a lot of fun. We've had some really great guests on in the past, and our last guest, Reese from Saul's Forge, recommended this lovely lady to me and said that she'd be a great guest. And from the little bit of chatting we've done before, I think we will have a great conversation today. And so my guest is Rose Lovegrove. And I did ask you how you wanted to be introduced, and you said creator of cool things / just a potter. So Rose, thank you for joining me.
I'm sorry for always having difficult answers to everything.
No, I think that's quite a simple answer. Just a potter.
Sometimes people ask me, like, if I'm a ceramic artist, and it just feels so formal, and I just want to respond with, I work with mud.
Okay,
that's what I do.
Is that what it comes down to? Is it just mud?
Yeah. So clay is kind of fundamentally just a type of mud. It's got some wonderful special properties about it, like how moldable it is and how well it holds those shapes. And I think that I'm right in telling you I'm not brilliant at these sorts of things, but I think this is because it has mineral in it called feldspar, which also gets its nickname, the mother of clay. And if you have feldspar in a sort of soil, then that's your clay. And you can have stoneware, which means it's got more stone in it, it's got more sand and grit in it, or earthenware, so it's got more like rotted down earthy stuff in it. And so it's pretty simple. It is just, yeah, I work with mud.
These are all terms that I've heard but never knew the difference.
And it can be daunting, I think, with a lot of like traditional crafts. They have their own lingo, and when you first start out, it's like, wow, how will I ever learn? There's so much. But yeah, normally it just means special mud that's got more sand, or special mud that's got more leaves.
Well, I like the way that you reduce it down and explain it on a simple level for me, I guess.
For myself.
Oh, okay. Well, fair enough. Yeah, so before we jump straight into it, again, like a little disclaimer before, these are our creator episodes, and they're not always going to be the most historically accurate. I know we spoke before, and you were a little bit worried about not remembering dates and names and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, these creator episodes, they're more just a little bit of fun where people get to listen and meet somebody who just makes something cool, somebody that I've met through my life doing what I do and creating the horns, and then it's someone that I feel just deserves a little bit of light and somebody that's interesting, and we can just sit and chat about what they do because they make something that I find fascinating. So they're not always going to be, for anybody listening, they're not always going to be the most historically accurate. We do, tons of episodes with literally, world leading scholars. So we cover that base. These are more about just interesting people making interesting things and how and why they do it. And usually these turn out to be a lot of fun. So don't hold us responsible for anything that we may say wrong. There you
I'm
go.
gonna fingers crossed I don't spread any misinformation.
No, we won't. I say
Take
we.
everything I say with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, I say we. I've made a career of just sitting on the fence. I just sit here and take no responsibility for anything anybody says. I don't put anything out there. I just nod.
I used to interview people, and I feel like now I am on the other end of it, and I'm like, there's more to thinking of how to respond to a question. But
Yeah, that's
there's a
just made me
skill to being an interviewer too.
that's just made me feel really nervous. The fact you said you used to interview people. No, I don't class these as interviews. I like to just class them as conversations because I don't have any notes. This is I guess is a little bit behind the scenes for anybody who's new here or even, anybody who's joined probably in the last 50 episodes. I don't think I've spoken about kind of the nuance that I don't make any notes. I don't have any questions ahead of time, even for the scholarly guests or these. It's literally a conversation, and it's for the most part, it's just my boyish kind of curiosity of a topic where I just want to learn more. So that's why I always kind of put them in that, oh, we're just going to have a chat. It's a chat, it's a conversation, because I always think an interview is a bit too formal for what this is.
Yeah, like also a lot of the time when you speak to someone who is more like then they have a knowledge basis in a particular historical topic or any topic really, a scientific or whatever it is, that they have like a lot to say. But I think there could be a value actually sometimes to talking to Hope, to talking to people like myself, where I'm not like jam packed with these dates and this information, but I'm sort of curious to become that, and I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I hope I'm in a similar position to like a lot of people who've just got into it and just had that realization that like, okay, for some reason everyone thinks history is boring, it has a boring reputation, when actually it's like the story of who we are and how we got here and really thrilling, and I have that like excitement to learn, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. I think, and that's also one of the reasons why we even started this podcast to try and bridge that gap between the scholarly world and like the everyday world, because so many scholars that I've spoken to on here, I don't think it's a purpose. I don't think they purposefully forget, but they just are so used to speaking to other scholars and in the world of other scholars that when it comes to actually speaking to people who aren't in that world, they forget there's so much information that people don't know. So they can get lost in kind of the details, and people just can't follow along because they don't know the building blocks. So that was the idea kind of behind this, to give those building blocks and kind of bridge that gap, because as I've said on here many times, I'm just I would like to say a lovable idiot. And I forget things very easy. So I can do hundreds of these podcasts and probably never learn anything. Um, so yeah,
I feel that.
and that's why it's important with people like you, because you're on that path, and everyone's on that path in different journeys, different times, and you can kind of hop in with what you know, and we can share that, and it's going to be probably a lot more digestible than like the really super
Mm.
high scholarly part.
And I'd really like as well to connect with people who maybe have that academic experience and are yeah, willing to contribute, because I have the hands-on side and I can try things and I can experiment with things. I have the means to do that. I'm really looking forward to or enjoying what I have done so far, or connecting with people who have more of that academic understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and before I mentioned to you kind of before the show, I said I was trying to like pinpoint exactly what we would class it as, and I was like, oh, so it's kind of like a type of um, you know, experimental archaeology, and you're like, but I'm not an archaeologist, which obviously is true, but it's that kind of thing where it's just somebody experimenting and looking back at finds or and
Mm.
looking back at history and playing around with it. And I think that's so important is how we learn things. You know, I would I wouldn't say what I do with horns is in any way kind of experimental archaeology or anything like necessarily accurate, but I would say I've learned so much, even just in the case of the main example would be like the younger and elder Fudak. Um, when it comes to carving, there is a vast difference that the younger Fudak is so much easier to carve. All the all the letters are pretty straight and they all finish. So in like the elder Fudak, you would have say like the manas, which where you'd have two lines or two staves either side, and then you'd have the diagonal lines that would come across, and you would leave these small kind of pieces, like triangular pieces, that would be very delicate and would often, when I was carving, would fall out so often because they were just really delicate. The horn isn't going to hold together, and with a younger father, you just don't find any runes that are kind of that shape or that design. They're all a single line and then with like lines branching off. And it was when until I started carving the two that I was like, oh, well, maybe this was one of the reasons why they changed from the elder Fulak down to the younger Fulak, because it's just when they were carving on stone, carving on wood, carving on organic materials, it could be that they just were sick of things breaking off like I am, because I get sick. It's
Yeah.
fucking annoying.
So when I'm decorating, sometimes I also carve runic things into my work, and I found that there's like particular shapes that are more challenging when I'm pressing it into the clay, and I'm really interested to see in person some of the Anglo-Saxon urns that do have inscriptions on them, because I want to see whether the potter who originally created it has struggled with the same areas as me or not. And
Mm-hmm.
see, like, you get sort of transported, don't you, when you see somebody's somebody's struggles in a pot from hundreds of years ago, and then if it's you make the same mistake, then it's like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
experiencing what they experienced, but never
Yeah,
knew them and so far from them.
yeah. And again, that's why it's important, because you can read as many books as you want and you can look at as many pictures of finds, but until you physically do it and play around with it and play with the mud, you're just not gonna you can't tell those little details and how things really work until you kind of do that. And that's why I love stuff like this.
Definitely, and there's with every material, like there can be all sorts of quirks that material has that are limitations in how you create things from it. And when you know those, then when you look at a bone comb or something, if you've worked with bone, you're going to have more respect for the skill of that craftsperson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's get on to pottery in general. Because you told me before the show, I learned something straight off the bat, that your little place where you make pottery is just called a pottery. I didn't.
This is my pottery. It's nice and simple, isn't it?
It is, because it's the same word for both the stuff and the place where you make it, I guess.
It's like a building. You don't call a building a built. That
Mm.
same thing. Yeah, this is my pottery that I'm sat in now. I suppose some people will just listen and won't be able to see it. But it's very small. It's actually just a garden shed about 2 meters squared, I think. Whenever people see pictures or videos online, they always think it's bigger. And then when they visit in person, they're like, oh, and they normally sound a bit disappointed, which I don't know how to feel about.
Hmm. Yeah, we all make things look a little bit. I was gonna say we all make things look bigger on Instagram, which just sounds really, really wrong.
Yeah,
But we
that's
all
not what you
do.
meant.
We all do like try and show like nobody wants to show like just a little small shed, do they? We try and make things look as good as they can. So it is lovely though. Whenever I see pictures you post, I'm like, it's such a cozy, sweet little place to hang out.
I think sometimes it appears a bit bigger than it is because it has quite a lot of mirrors. But I feel that when I'm working, it's really important to see what I'm doing really clearly. And I don't use electric light when I'm working, partly because I think you can see better without it and the colours you can see better, but also because I'm not on the mains. I have a little sort of A4 page sized solar panel on the outside, and that powers my two lights here. So I just save what power I have got for when I really need it because it's properly gone dark.
Okay. So okay. So how does it work in terms of making the lovely things that you make? Do
The
you,
whole process, or
yeah, well, the process. Because if you don't have a electricity, is it like a foot pedal that kind of?
So
Because
my
okay,
wheel has a treadle.
my knowledge of pottery
Mm-hmm.
is that little clip from Ghost. That's the best you're
Mm.
getting out of me on how pottery works. So to me, it's just this really romantic thing. So that's you're gonna
Yeah.
have to teach me how like that's I'm
I
gonna be.
can't live that clip down. I can't live
Oh no,
that
you
clip down.
yeah, I bet you can. But that's my knowledge based on this topic.
So it's undeniably phallic, but that is a side note. Let's
Okay.
start with clay.
Yeah.
I will take clay, which I get from my local pottery suppliers. And yes, they still exist and they can survive. It's a funny little dusty building with a lovely chap in there who is always happy to see people in a grumpy way. So I go there and I buy some clay, and I don't dig my own clay out of the ground, although I have, and I've sort of played with it and experimented with it, and I'm planning to use raw clay. I know somewhere locally where the clay seems quite good. So I am going to do that. But so far, I just buy my clay from up the road and then bring it home, and it's come out of a machine press to get it consistent, to get most of the air out of it and the bits out of it and get it to the right sort of dampness.
Okay.
So it's like it comes in a block, and it's not always dry enough or not always wet enough, depending on what project you're doing, which is where wedging comes into it. This is a bit like kneading bread, but you're aiming to get any air bubbles out. And the molecules, stop me if I'm rambling,
No, no, no,
but
no.
the molecules in clay are lenticular. So they're shaped like little lentils. And when you wedge the clay, you're encouraging these to stack up in piles straight to each other. Like if you had a jam jar full of Smarties, right, and you just poured them in and they were all crazy ways around, but if you shake it, they'll like go a little bit more flat.
Okay.
Weird
Yeah.
analogy. So
I know what you mean though.
I'm glad you do. You've
Yeah.
obviously shaken a lot of jars of Smarties. So
Yeah.
when you're pressing that clay, you're encouraging all of those molecules to stack up like bricks, and that's going to fundamentally make the clay stronger in the end as well when you throw the pot.
Stacking like bricks is a much better analogy, isn't it?
Yeah, then Smarties in a jar. That was really just.
You know, that made me think then of, when we used to go to like tombolas. I'm not sure how old you are, but like a tombola, like as a kid, for me, they used to always have like this little jar of sweeties or Smarties, and you had to buy a pound raffle ticket, and you would enter and guess how many Smarties were in a jar, and you would like pick it up and look at it and be like, I think there's
Yeah,
like
see how much it weighs.
I think there's like 751 Smarties in
Mhm.
here. and then that's your little guessing you write on the back of your raffle ticket. I don't know if this, like, for American
No.
listeners, I don't know if they even do this anywhere else in the world, or this is fundamentally a British thing. But
Well,
yeah,
it's like produce markets do it too, don't they? It's like guess what the heaviest onion weighed, and then you get a chicken.
yeah, I think that I think maybe we're from different parts of the
Yeah, yeah,
country,
you can tell.
because I've never weighed an onion, but I've definitely guessed some jars of Smarties, but I've never won a chicken either.
Yeah. Well, I get to play this game like at least once a week now because I have to weigh my parcels, and the weighing scales that I use to do this, like my parcels that I'm posting away, the weighing scales, the battery's quite low on them, and sometimes they're accurate and sometimes they're not. So I have to guess whether I think it's being truthful if it feels around that.
Yeah. Do you have like an onion that you know the weight of to one
Yeah, and I
side that
can
you can kind of,
compare
yeah,
with my prize onion.
you can be like, okay, I know this onion is about, this is a kilo, this is a good
Yeah.
onion, and you can just kind of weigh up.
Maybe I can do it the other way around because I'm growing onions. So maybe I can try and grow my onions to exactly the weight of a tankard in a parcel, and then
Yeah,
I'll always know that it
maybe.
weighs an onion.
Okay, so we have the clay. We effectively, you said wedging, but it seems like it's like you said, kneading a dough.
It's a lot like kneading a dough, but you're trying to get all the air bubbles out and trying to get it smooth consistency, really well mixed all the way through.
Hmm.
And then once you've done this, you chop it up into your balls of whatever weight you're going to need for whatever you're making. And that's when I take it over to my potter's wheel, which is actually right behind me. And I chuck it down on the middle, which I want to emphasize is harder than it looks. I always feel sorry for people when they first try it out and I say to put it in the middle and then it just goes off right on the side.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I imagine that makes a huge difference if you're an inch or two off to one side. Obviously, it's not gonna spin, because the whole idea is that it spins in the middle and then you can shape it from there. If you're off, it's just not gonna work.
Right. So the second stage is centering, and that's where you use a bit of strength to bring it to the very middle whilst it's turning. And when you first begin learning pottery, the centering can be the most challenging part. So it becomes more important that a beginner gets it as close to the middle as they can from the beginning. Otherwise, they're going to have a lot of trouble trying to use muscles that they don't yet have to bring that clay to the center. But then, as you say, it's really important that you don't have a few inches, you don't even have it a few millimeters off of center, really. But you do that once it's turning, which helps you get it really precise. It's yeah, and then when you brought it right to the center, you'll be using water the whole time to make sure that the clay doesn't stick to your hands. And the clay has sand in it, depending more sand or less sand, whatever you use as your sort of body clay. And so that if you don't use enough water, that can really sand down on your hands. You know, it's like,
oh wow, okay,
gonna
yeah.
hold a belt sander. I mean, it's not that bad, but it's yeah, it can really sort of get your hands.
Well, yeah, well, sandpaper's called sandpaper for a reason, and obviously, it's like the different grits. The with if we don't get too nerdy, it's like the amount of sand granules, grains of sand,
Grains.
grains of sand per inch or whatever, and it's like that's the grit number. So yeah, of course, if there's sand in there and you're spinning it, how fast do you know how fast the potter's wheel spins?
No, but I want to. It can go pretty fast. I mean, I change
If somebody
the
in the
speed.
chat can, if somebody in the chat can maybe just quickly Google how fast a potter's wheel spins, that would
But
be.
then you're going to get an electric wheel. They've got like gearing to them. I wonder what their top speed is. I reckon I can match it on that with my foot.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure you could. Okay.
The treadle in my wheel is working somewhat like a sewing machine, an old treadle sewing machine, and it has a little axle in there, and then a flywheel at the bottom, and then it comes up to the main sort of, forgotten the name of it now, the part where I throw, and there's a lot of weight to the flywheel. So
Yeah.
once you've got the speed up, you don't have to keep pedaling for a little while. You can take your foot off and just work, and the speed will go down. But because that
Right.
flywheel,
Okay.
it really does keep itself going. Yeah.
Is that like a modern, or do you know if that's a modern introduction to, like, I guess, manual spinning, turning?
The potter's wheel, or the treadle with the axle and the flywheel.
Yeah, like having a flywheel in there. Is that like a modern thing, or do you know whether or what do you know what, like let's say historically what a potter's wheel would look like?
So this depends a little bit on the demand for pottery. If you travel way back to ancient Egypt, it seems like there were quite a lot of wheels going on. I hope I'm right in saying, and that they were often pushed with a hand or maybe pushed with a foot, but you'd sit on the floor. They think this is kind of the origin of the potter's wheel. And then you have it being used in Greece and Rome, and coming to England with the Romans, and being used like widespread potter's wheel going on. And then when the Romans left Britain, the use of the potter's wheel declined, but this wheel was not axled, I don't think. It's one of those things where it's like you feel that any moment they might uncover some fresco and it just reveals that actually they did have that. But
Okay.
as it is, as I understand it, the stick wheel, which is turned with a big stick, and it's just a cartwheel mounted in the ground. So you have like dig a hole, put a post in it, put cartwheel on top, turn it with a stick, and then throw on the middle. And you push one with your foot and push one with your hand. And then in Britain, the Romans.
That must have you tried doing that? That must take some coordination.
I really like the idea of it, and I've spoken to the term's a wheelwright, isn't it? A man who makes traditional cartwheels, and he has said I can use one of his cartwheels to attempt this, but then he said he didn't want it to get too wet, and pottery is a very watery process. So I'm on the lookout. I'm hoping that something turns up. So I'm on a budget, so I'm hoping something turns up on Facebook Marketplace or something like this, and I can grab a cartwheel and yeah, I definitely want to do that. I want to throw some really big pots, and ideally you have a wheel which is low to do that, so that you can stand up as it gets taller.
Okay, I've always the times that I've seen like people throw in. Is it just called throw? Am I right in just saying? Is it just called throwing?
Yeah, it's called throwing.
The times I've seen people do it, it looks like such. Okay. It looks like I could maybe do it, and this, like, I imagine a lot of people think they can do it, but it's really difficult. But it looks like it would be a lot of fun, and you kind of like just throw it down there and you spin it, and you kind of just put your hands on it, and you like push in a little bit, and it makes the shape of it, and you kind of bring it out of the top. And anybody that's seen somebody doing it, they kind of like put the fingers and bring it out, and I'm like, I could do that. I'm sure I could like have a go at that. But I imagine it's so difficult, and like the smallest little thing you just, because how do you keep it the same, like the same thickness the whole way up? Because I imagine if you're starting with a clump of clay, and it's in the middle, and you've got to shape it into, let's say, a cup, or just not even anything with like a handle, just a vase. Who am I? A vase, or a handleless.
A beaker. A handleless pot is a beaker.
Okay, a beaker. Yeah. So how do you kind of shape that so it stays the same thickness the whole way up? Because I feel like I'd have it like really thick and chunky in some parts, and some parts would be really thin where you could maybe like just poke your finger through.
So firstly, you said when you see it, you feel like you could do that. And then you said you thought probably it's way harder than it looks.
Yeah.
So I'm going to touch on that first, which is absolutely you could do that, because people have for forever, like people do. You can totally learn, and I think most people are capable of learning to throw a pot. And some people are going to pick it up faster than others. Some people are just have the right kind of hand strength off the bat, which is going to help you not, you're not going to be limited by hand strength. And then, second of all, you said you felt like yours would be really thick in places and thin in places.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably true as well.
Okay.
Probably when you start off, yeah, they will be thick and they will be thin. And to learn to have a repeatable consistency, which is equal up the pot, is a big part of what your skill in pottery is. That's a large part of when you learn to throw. What you're trying to master is having exactly the thickness you wanted, exactly all the way. When I was starting and I was throwing, my mother, who was a potter, and I was using her equipment, would say to me to throw it thinner and throw it thinner and thinner and thinner, and then it would tear inevitably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But your understanding of the material then is deeper because you have pushed it to its limits. And I think, sadly, with pottery, or not sadly in the end, because you don't need your beginner pots, but with pottery, a lot of the time it's better to push yourself to the point where you make the mistakes and then in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say in order to get a really consistent pot, you just make many pots that you've made too thin and torn through. Okay. And eventually you learn to feel that depth when you're pinching, to know, okay, don't go past that because it's going to tear. The material changes as you're making it thinner, and as it becomes weaker, it will ripple or buckle under your fingers. So if you can feel the very first warnings of that happening, then you know to stop when you feel that. But then you probably pushed it a bit far.
Is it repairable one if you go that a little bit too far, or is it just like you got to smush it all up and start again?
Whilst the clay of a pot is wet, many things are repairable, but is it worth the time? Throwing is a relatively quick process once you get the hang of it. So I think, if you go too thin and you go through at the bottom, or you go too thick, you could carve it off or you could sculpt something on, but it's not going to have the integrity that the original pot would have had. And it's also just going to take longer than scooping it off and starting again. And any clay that you haven't fired is reusable anyway. So you could make it into something better. So it's worth keeping the clay.
Yeah, I guess that's a good thing, that you don't have to, like, if you, when you're throwing it, if you mess it up, you can kind of just get really angry and like squidge it all back up into a little ball and slam it down and start again.
Pretty much. Sometimes you have to dry it out and wedge it back up, but
do you?
It's worth it.
Well, you can get the anger out even more, I guess.
Yeah, you can get really strong as well from wedging it.
Because when I was a kid, I remember, like, I was one of these kids who played outside all the time. I was like constantly making dens and digging up gardens and whatever else. And I feel like you find so much pottery. Like, we used to just find like tons of like just tiny little pieces, and I had no idea what they were, and they probably weren't even very old. But it just seemed to be everywhere that we were, like just these little shards, maybe not even an inch by an inch, maybe like centimeter by a centimeter, just tiny little pieces of like broken up pottery. It was just all over the place, and I guess that shows how popular it's been for.
Oh, definitely. And for all you know, like 7-year-old you might have held a piece of medieval pottery and gone, "That's a nice green," and then just dropped it back in the ground.
Oh, absolutely! I did not appreciate it.
No. And it's hard, I think, to identify. It's kind of a hobby of its own. There's people collecting shards. I believe you call them shards when they're shards that are old. But yeah, also the little bits that you're saying you found when you're playing or, you know, picked out of your mud pies. Those are also fundamental to archaeology. Like pottery tells us so much about a, a style that people were interested in, but also about the food that people were eating. So if you have a pot that's broken, it's really likely to have residue of whatever was being cooked or eaten from it, or whoever was putting it is going to be on the inside of that pot. So it's yeah, that it's really important, those tiny shards that maybe yours were just your mum's tea tray that she accidentally dropped once, but whatever they are, they do tell a story of whoever dropped them there.
Yeah, I remember finding some like beautiful little shards, and even as a kid, I was like, "This is really cool." And obviously, like being young, I was just like, "Oh, I'll just forget about it. I'm just going to throw it back in the ground and run off. I've got something else to do." But I do remember like looking at them and appreciating in the moment of being like, "Oh, this is cool. Like, this probably is really old and cool." But like, what can you do with a shard? Because it's very rarely when I was digging, I was like, "Oh, there's tons of shards of the same pot." So how's this like one little shard got here on its own, and without all the other little? Because you'd imagine if it's broken, it would just be the whole thing would be there, but just broken.
It's lovely. It is lovely, isn't it? How things travel. I mean, for all you know, somebody else thought it was quite nice, picked it up, carried it around for a long time, and then got a hole in their pocket and dropped it again.
Oh,
We live
yeah.
like quite near a river here, um, and walking along the riverside, there's always little bits of pottery that are smashed there. And I've heard often people who walk by rivers will find like clay pipes, Victorian clay pipes, and things like this. I
Mhm.
guess you keep them or you leave them, depending.
Mhm.
Depends on your attitude, isn't it? Are you a take it home person? Are you one of those people with
Oh,
like jam jars around the house full of gubbins that you found?
this is going to be telling of me. Uh, I have um, a boot full of rocks, and these rocks came from the Jurassic coast, and I picked them up.
Okay.
They're not fossilized. I just thought they were cool. I just
Cool
picked this.
rocks, yeah.
I just thought I picked them up because they looked cool, and they've been in my car for about 5 months. They've done nothing other than just cost me fuel. They've just made my
Yeah.
car way more, and just paid fuel to lump these rocks around with me. But I don't want to throw them out, and I don't have anywhere to put them yet. So I just have like a car full of. I say a car full. There's like, but there's enough. There's like a good couple of handfuls of like cool rocks. So I'm definitely a keeper of anything that I think is a little bit odd, a little bit unusual.
You're like a toddler just running up with I found a leaf, take it
Yeah.
home.
I have
I have
often been compared to a toddler. Yes, you're right.
all my coat pockets have got little top shells and similar shells in them because yeah, I live by the coast and walking on the beach. I'd be like,
Mhm.
that's so beautiful. I'm definitely going to take it home and make it into jewelry. And then there it lives in the depths of my pockets.
Yep. That's exactly what my car has become. Just oh these no, because that's made me feel really bad now. I'm like I've taken these rocks from this beautiful coast and they're now
Yeah.
living in the back of my car. I'm like,
You could put
oh
them back somewhere else, and then some poor person like you will be looking at them and thinking, how did that get here? Just one rock like that.
yeah, that one really cool rock. Um, no, I'm gonna do something with them now. I'm gonna do something with my cool rocks. um, okay, let's get back to the
Yeah, we've
pottery.
we've gone off on one.
Wait, that don't worry that we do that. So let's finish off the process, and then we can go into kind of like the more historical side of
Mm.
how you and what you look at. We've got the throne kind of pot shape. We've made it into a beautiful beaker, and it's wavy, and it looks really nice, and the thickness is absolutely perfect. What do we do with it then? Because obviously that's quite soft. Like if you can't drink out of that, if you squeeze it too hard, it's going to
No, no,
break.
it's completely floppy. So
Exactly.
when you have a pot at that stage, the only thing that you can do is leave it well alone, leave it to dry a little bit, and then you go through some stages of dryness, and you have particular names for them because you know what you need to do at different stages. But the most important one is cheese dry, and this is when the clay sort of feels like cheddar cheese. And this is a useful stage because it will still take clay on, things will still stick to it. Once it's dry, if you put wet clay on it, it's not going to stick. And if you force it to stick and you manage to make it stick somehow, it's going to make the top crack. So that in between stage of cheese dry is when you add any handles or feet or little like loops for ropes if you've made a pot that's going to have ropes around it. That's that stage. And it's also when it will take decorations with stamps, or when you can dip it in slip. So slip is just watered down clay, and you can have all different colors of clay. You might have a white clay, which means it didn't have iron contaminating it, or like I use a red clay, like you would expect a terracotta flower pot is red clay.
Yeah. I think that's what most people would associate with, or certainly I would anyway. All the, like, I think chimney pots, that kind of thing, you always tend to see them in like a very red color.
Yeah. And but then you have like bone china, and that's white as anything, and that's a clay. But
is that clay? Is that clay?
Well,
would that clay? Oh, see, this is a whole different world that I've not even thought of. I don't know what I thought china was.
Chinaware is ceramic. So chinaware is clay, but it has. Okay, it's really not my area because like fancy white teacups don't really interest me. But I believe I'm right in saying that it has bone ash in it. And bone ash is exactly what it sounds like. It's the ash of burning bones, and this makes it sort of translucent and does wonderful things to it. Chinaware is not my area.
But so are all ceramics? Okay, what's ceramics then? Does that ceramics just like a term that covers?
Yeah. I put a face because there's a fact here about the word, but I'm not sure I trust myself to remember it well. It might be to do with Athens.
Okay.
It might be to do with the place where pots are made, but I'm untrustable. This is when I want a Joe Rogan moment where somebody Googles it for me.
Okay, yeah, I wish we had someone that could do that. If anybody in the chat does want to do that, please do.
I knew this. Like, where's my notebook even?
Yeah.
It will say it early in.
But ceramics, I guess, is like a cover-all term for anything,
or vessels made from clay. And I don't think it includes stone carving, but I wonder if it could.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's just clay things. Because it's the material is ceramic, the fired clay is ceramic, and the word terracotta is just cooked earth. So that helps. Just cooked mud.
So would terracotta class as a ceramic?
Mm-hmm. In my mind, for sure. I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Okay, I'm with you.
So flower pots. When you fire your pot, so let's go back to the process. We have our pot, and we've put a handle on it, and now we've let it get to bone dry. So it's got no moisture left in it. When you touch it to your skin, it doesn't feel cold. Nothing's evaporating out of it anymore, and it's dry all the way through. And that's really important because if it isn't, it's going to explode in the kiln.
Okay, so we have cheese dry, which is cheesy. Like it feels like cheese. Then we have bone dry, which is dry as a bone.
Exactly. And there's a middle stage that I often will engrave things at, which I lovingly call chocolate dry. It's not the technical term, it's my term, but it is when it goes like chocolate. So you go between cheese to chocolate to bone dry.
Okay.
Once you're bone dry, you put that pot in the kiln and fire it. I'm using an electric kiln, so that's not at all historically accurate in the least. But the brilliant thing about using my electric kiln is I don't have to have an entire woodland that I'm coppicing, nor do I have to collect and handle bottles of gas. So I have a special love for the electric kiln. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I put my pots into my electric kiln, which is still quite a crude thing, and then I will fire them in there. And when they come out of there, they're like flower pots. They have no glaze on them or anything, and that is exactly, it feels like a flower pot. Look, we've got somebody, some helpful Google person
We do.
has told us.
Demery said that the etymology of the early 19th century word ceramic, the origin seems to be Greek for keramos. Keramos, I think. So yeah, I think you were right. Seems to come from ancient Greece.
I heard a small factoid about this is that Athens, I believe, has very plentiful clay resource around it, and there's a lot of variation in that clay as well. So you could have a red clay, a white clay, and a black clay there, and that made it easy to utilize the natural resources to make those beautiful black figure vases. And so that gave them a good start in being really good potters.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, so they go in the kiln. Yeah, how do you stop them cracking? Because I think most people can kind of figure out, or they can imagine, I've seen a pot that is cracked and you've got like that really almost like a lightning bolt kind of through it.
They can crack in a range of ways for a range of reasons. So if you put a pot in there and it was moist on the inside, as it expands, it will, as the water expands and tries to leave the clay suddenly because it's turning to steam, that will cause it to explode. And the center pops and the outside comes off. And so that's why it's important that it's very dry when it goes in the kiln. Then secondly, you have chemically bound water, which leaves at a later stage. So as you bring the temperature up to this stage, you have to go slowly. You can't heat the pots too suddenly. And if you were to throw it straight into an open fire, it would explode. So you bring it slowly past that stage. When they were open fire firing pots, they would be pots, the clay had a lot of grog in it, which means anything organic material that is mixed in there with the feldspar mineral clay. And that grog creates these tunnels, these roots where the moisture can escape through, because it's almost as if the clay is slightly porous. And that's one of the reasons that clay can cope with a quicker change in temperature, will be because of all these roots and the grog. I hope I'm saying the right thing. I'm pretty sure I am, though. And that's why if you want to open fire your clay, you need to have a clay with a lot of grog in it, or a grog body. Mine doesn't have very much grog in it, which means it's quite strong. And it also means I have to heat it very slowly.
Yeah. So is that how, I don't know if traditionally the right word is, but is that one of the oldest forms of firing, that you would just have an open? I guess it would probably be the coals of a fire rather than actual live flames.
I think that they would put their pots that they made, or whatever it was, bigger sometimes, into deep into the fire, and then build the fire over it, and it can be heated semi-slowly as the fire builds and gets hotter. It's also possible that the pits were dug sooner than we previously thought, as well as kilns, quite sophisticated kilns actually being built from clay or into the rocky crevices of the side of Earth, or if you had happen to have rocks that had an entrance like that. It's really hard to say. It's hard to see evidence of this, but as I understand it, yeah, earliest forms probably just putting them into the fire, and then your success rate might be low, but you get some in the end, and then it builds up from there. You have pit firing, then you have sort of crude kiln, and then the more sophisticated wood-fired kilns, and then you have all sorts of chimneys and flumes being added on, and it just gets better. And then you finish with a tiny little electric kiln box like mine, and it just doesn't work.
Sometimes you can overcomplicate things.
Yeah. It gets well, it's quite simple actually. My kiln, it has plugs into the mains electric, and then there are just these coils of metal. I've forgotten what the name of it, but it's a high heat resistant metal, and it's just like a great big toaster. It's got an on and off that just switches, and the higher you've turned the temperature of the kiln up, the longer it stays on for, and the less it stays off. So that's all it does.
It does sound much easier than having to light a fire every time.
Yeah, and having to maintain that fire and feed that fire without letting the temperature change too suddenly. I have a lot of respect for people who put fire in this way, and I hope one day I will be one of those people. But first, I need to like coppice my own hazelwood.
Yeah. No, I'm sure you will. You clearly have like the desire to want to keep progressing and keep doing just cool bits. Just like you said, you wanted to with the like the cartwheel. You want to just keep trying new things, and that's part of the fun and part of the journey.
I have not fired my clay from scratch in a bonfire. I mean, I have tried, and it's blown up or similar. But I do sometimes seal pots with the aid of an open fire. If I'm having a bonfire in the garden or something, I will take down the Bronze Age inspired bottles, which are lovely things. If you haven't seen them, they sort of are like anthropomorphic goat type figures, little bottles with 2 feet and horns. And I take these down to the open fire, get them really hot, and then put beeswax, rub beeswax onto them to seal them. And I was reading, this is a very early method of making things waterproof that would have been used in the Bronze Age, but more often they used animal fats. I'm just a bit wary of animal fats because I'm worried they might go rancid.
Okay, yeah.
But I've heard good things. I've heard they don't, but I'm yeah. I don't know. There's something about rubbing lard all over it. It's just not great. I've tried it. I've got one and it hasn't gone rancid, but I don't really want to imagine if it was in somebody's house and they were like, "This really smells like lard."
Yeah, I don't think you would. I mean, it seems like it's tried and tested, so maybe give it a go and see.
Mm.
But
The beeswax is very effective.
Yeah, beeswax is great. Like I said, someone in the chat said that we use them
I love it.
on our horns. It is a great material. We line all our horns, and it's just, especially the one we get now is like deodorized. So it's for when you put it in a drinking vessel, you're not getting any smell, any taste. It really does just kind of do a lovely job, and it's much better than a plastic resin that a lot of people use.
It feels right as well. If probably quite a lot of people, I imagine, are going to drink mead, and then there's a sort of ode to the mead in sealing it with beeswax.
Yeah, there's a lot of bee appreciation. Those little guys are great. I love bees. I have it on my keys.
Do you have a hive or no?
I wish I did. On my keys, I do have a little bee resuscitation kit though. It's like a little vial of sugary water, just in case I come across a needy bee who's hungry, and I can just like get a little bit out and put it for him or her
And
to.
that's like his life's work. How much
Mhm.
honey does a bee, how much sugar does a bee see in its lifetime? And you just carry that around on your keys.
I do, yeah, but it's to give back to the bee if it needs it, and like you need it,
Of
you're
course.
in. It's like a bee ambulance, and I can just
I
kind of,
like that idea.
and it's yeah, it's just it's like a little, it's a little viral on a key ring, and you can just kind of pop it out whenever you see a bee struggling, and I'm there, and I can just kind of give him some sugar and be like, go little guy, you get back to your hive. This is what you need.
I wonder if they ever fake it. They see you coming and they're
Oh,
like, that's
maybe,
the
yeah.
guy, that's the guy.
They've got wise. They're like everyone play dead. All the bees are just like laying on the floor, like
Dropping at your feet.
yeah, that's the guy who just gives us all the sugar. We don't have to do anything. Maybe, who knows? Um,
It's such a thing to put bird seed like on your windowsills, but I don't know people putting like honey on there for the bees.
yeah. Okay, so we fired them.
Hmm.
And that, I guess, that is that the end of the process? We now
Oh
have
no.
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 Oh, there you go.
I wish I wish that was the end of the process. Well, in the case of a flower pot, it is, and in the case of a stamp, it is. But when it comes out of the kiln this time, and you're going to look at it and find that it's first of all bright orange, and second of all porous. It's like really porous. If you put water on it, it disappears like that, soaks into the pot. So if you were to drink a glass of milk from one of those, it would be full of milk
Oh,
inside it,
and
and
then it is gonna stink.
then it will possibly go bad.
So that
Might go moldy.
that's similar to horn. And when a lot
Hmm.
of people buy horns from lesser horn makers, I'm not going to name any names, but if you buy a horn that hasn't been lined, because horns, natural material and it's porous, people will
Mm.
drink, and it doesn't. It's not enough that you're gonna see the liquid disappear. It's not enough that it's kind of going to soak up
No, but
a
it's
decent
soaking
amount.
in, isn't it?
But it's going in there, and then you're going to get that kind of smell and residue from everything you drink from the horn. It just goes a little bit mingy.
Yeah. So you have to glaze your pot if you want it to be watertight. And as we were saying, you might use an animal fat traditionally, then you might use a bee's wax. I think oftentimes they would seal it just as if it were a cast iron pan, where you get it nice and hot and then put the fat in. And I
Hmm.
want it to smoke. I'm not 100% sure whether you do or don't. I never know how to seal my cast iron, but anyway, you get it hot and you put some fats in there, and then you would want to redo that occasionally and replenish that seal on your pot. Otherwise, it's going to wear out. Or you could take a slightly more modern approach. It's not very modern, which is to cover it with silica powder, which is glass, the base of
Okay.
glass. So you would mix up the different minerals and have them mixed with water, and the sort of the main body of that glaze is the silica. The glass is in there, all the fundamental things for glass are in there, and it's full of water. And you dip that very porous pot in there and keep it well mixed, and it will absorb all the water. And when you lift it out, it's got a really even coverage of white powder on the outside, and you can't see through it or anything. It's just dust, and if you touch it,
Oh
you make a
wow.
horrible
Okay.
mark.
Hmm.
And then you put the pot back into the kiln, making sure they aren't touching each other,
Oh,
and fire it again. And you heat it up until the glass, or the base for the glass, melts, and it will become see-through. Or if you've put some pigmentation in there, then it will reveal that pigmentation. And then you cool it back down again. And this time you have to make sure you do that very slowly.
mm.
Otherwise, the glass will crack on the outside of the pot and pop off. And then, so the firing process, my firing process, is about 9 hours long on the way up. And I leave it for about 12 hours on the way back down. And then I open it. And then sometimes it goes ding because I've opened it too soon and I have to close the lid and come back and open it. and get them out, and then they are done.
Then they're
Finally,
done. Is that what gives them that lovely glossy shine to them?
that makes them shiny for sure. And I use all sorts of different pigments or metals, often on the outside, so that they might not be shiny all the way. I might not have glass halfway down and instead have iron or something nice like this. But I always I always do actually have glass on the inside. So effectively, when you pour your drink in there, it's like you poured it into a normal glass, a glass,
Right. Yeah.
which has
Okay.
got clay around it.
I think most people listen to this as you're explaining will completely understand. Next time they pick a mug, well, I say a mug, but like a would a mug? Yeah, what's ceramic? I don't know how they make modern mugs.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sure that's on a
They
huge.
they don't tend to
Yeah.
throw them, they injection mold them, but much of the process is the same.
Yeah.
And I actually have a soft spot for a good supermarket
Yeah. Oh, they're Asda. Asda are the kings of the mug game. They have some
Yeah,
absolute brilliant mugs. Yeah, they really they know
I
what they're
love
doing. The Asda have they just do some brilliant novelty mugs. They really do.
I love that you're telling an artisan potter
If you go to
how
Asda and I
much
guess
you love. You've got to get to
no,
Asda.
okay, you did in my defense, you did say you do like
Yeah, yeah. I
so
like a Fox and Ivy, Tesco's Fox and Ivy ceramics. I like them. Some of them are just off-brand Denby, really. They're just copying Denby but affordable, which isn't,
yeah.
it's not really legit, but they are beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But I think most people will when they feel, especially if they have anything that is thrown, you can feel that kind of sometimes or certainly on something you can feel the difference between the outside and the inside. Like you said, you make sure you do the silica on the inside. You can just feel that difference. The inside has a like smooth glaze, and then sometimes you can on the outside it feels just not necessarily rough but textured. Would that be
Yeah.
that it's been finished with something else on the outside?
Yeah, it may have been finished with something else or with a higher content of this mineral or that mineral. There's lots of different ways. It's like the alchemy of glaze making is a whole thing of its own. I largely buy my glaze base from my pottery supplier and then add pigments myself. But this can wildly change the recipe, wildly change the way that it works, and create interesting things and also create awful things. It's
Hmm.
a very trial and error. And there's so many variables with a glaze that it is, yeah, it's definitely a challenging part of the process. But yeah, you might find that it's been finished with something else and that makes it matte, or you might just have no glaze on the outside and then it's matte there. And it doesn't really matter because that's not really where you put the liquids. But
Hmm.
then you don't want to microwave it because all that moisture will escape really fast to make it break.
Okay. Well, now I know not to put my matte mugs in the microwave. I don't even own a microwave actually, so there's that. Um, I
It's one of the
just
most common questions I get asked is it microwave safe? And I also don't have a microwave, so I'm not very on the ball about what is or isn't. I just say no. I
yeah.
don't know. Microwaves don't seem safe.
Yeah, I used to have one, and then when I moved house, I just didn't have one for the longest time, and I was like, keep meaning to go and buy one, and then I just realized I didn't actually need one. I can just warm stuff up on the little hob, or in the oven. So I just kind of learned to not have one anymore, and then I just figured I just didn't miss it. It was just kind of yeah, uh, just was one of them.
There's
Um,
always an option, isn't there? It's a nice thing about when pottery became a less industrialized process in Britain, it became more common for people to just half fire things and would put a mug that they made in just in the back of their hearth and then fire it like that. And I don't know. I don't know if there is a link there, but in my mind, I'm like, well, if you don't have a microwave and you're not using it, you will find a way to get the same effect, and it'll be fine.
yeah, absolutely. It feels like there are so many elements to go wrong. And this episode's certainly given me a new appreciation for people who hand throw pottery, because the process is quite lengthy, and I would guess the most people who pick up maybe something you make or something that that somebody is that's kind of like thrown by hand, um they look at it, and when it has like a higher price tag, they don't really understand, because unfortunately you can go to Asda, shout out Asda and their novelty mugs. They can go to Asda and buy a mug for £3, and we kind of have been
Yeah, yeah.
spoiled, particularly in whether it's like kitchenware, like your crockery or your mugs. Like they're so cheap that we
They're
just kind
so
of
cheap. It's
we're
kind of
spoiled.
insane.
Yeah, we're spoiled by it. And then when you have somebody who throws it by hand, and then he's charging, you know, 20 plus pounds for like a really nice mug, that like the big tankard that you're holding up there. I don't know the price of it, but it's a really hefty thing. But some people might look at that and
Well,
go, why is that the price it is? And this really does explain why it is, because
yeah.
it's not just the ones that make it through the process. Anybody who creates anything understands that unfortunately the price has to account for all those hours and all the ones that don't make it, because all the hours spent putting them in the kiln and the ones that blow up, unfortunately that
Mm.
is time, and you have to be able to live and feed, you have to be able to eat and feed yourself. I feel like I accidentally called you like a cattle then, that you have to be able to feed. You know,
This girl need feed.
yeah, you have to you have to be able to look after yourself. So, all those hours of everything going wrong, and the ones that don't work, they unfortunately have to be
Mm.
factored in to the price of the ones that do work. And
Yeah, totally.
there seems to be such a margin of error, because you're doing so many different processes, especially when you're heating things up, cooling them down, and they have to cool at a certain speed. It must be a nightmare.
And I'm clumsy. So,
I don't know why I got that impression.
mm, was it maybe how much I dropped my phone before we had begun this call?
Oh yeah, you were you were portrait, landscape, upside
I
down for a little bit.
Yeah, I am clumsy, and I feel like when I first say that, people are like, "Haha, clumsy Potter," but actually, there's a lot of reassurance for me in it, because sometimes even when you do what you feel like you did everything right, the pot still breaks. So
Yeah,
I can just use that as an excuse. And when I break something because I'm a fool, I can just look and go, "Ah, it might have blown up in the kiln anyway. Get
yeah.
away with it."
Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay, we've been speaking for well over an hour. Um, okay, we haven't even touched on the historical side. Let's touch on that before we wrap up, and then we'll wrap up and let the patrons kind of have some questions for you, and we will look a little bit more in depth at how you do what you do, like how you create your version of pots. Because I feel like we've spoken about pottery as a whole and the techniques, but you make some really beautiful things, and you do use some historical elements and kind of bring them into them. So yeah, I think it'd be nice to let the patrons look at that. So if anybody listening does want to get that extra episode at the end, it's just Patreon/Nordic Mythology Podcast. Like I say, you can jump into these creator episodes, and we have the whole back catalog on there, and you can listen to them. But yeah, let's just talk a little bit about your love for bringing like historical finds, I guess, into your work, because I love that. We spoke about doing some bits for Horns of Odin, and you sent me this. You were very I've forgotten the word, not shy, but like modest. Okay, you were modest about your little drawings you sent me, and the 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 little drawings you sent me of the mugs you were going to make were, I thought they were fantastic. They just reminded me of something that could have been pulled out of like the Victorian era. This little piece of paper with all these little drawings on and like notations of what you were gonna do. they were great, and you were kind of telling me like all these different bits and kind of where they came from. So yeah, I'd love to talk about that kind of side of it and your love for bringing that stuff through.
So my drawings, thank you very much for the compliment, by the
I know you were like, oh,
way.
you were like, oh, I just threw these together, and I was like, no, you
Mhm.
didn't. Don't lie to me like that. They're really good.
So I think being able to draw, wow, how to even condense what I want to say here. I didn't go to school. I don't have very much formal education. I jumped into education on and off, but mostly I was home educated, and I would spend a lot of my time just making things, drawing, painting, sculpting, whatever it was. So I think I've got practice hours to do that, and I can use that. And it is incredibly useful to me to be able to jot down what I'm thinking and check that it is going to look how I think, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. And so, yeah, especially also if I'm working with a client, to be able to send them a picture of what I mean. Because if you ever try to actually describe a specific pot, it's pretty challenging. Even if you know the terminology, it's still quite challenging.
Hmm. Yeah, I imagine it is. Um, so okay, so if we look at like the historical bits and the little stuff, so how does that process work? Do you just find a little pot in a museum? Is that am I being slightly offensive here if I say do you just
No,
go
no, no.
to like a museum and take pictures and be like, I like this pot, and how, and also like how many whole complete pots do we have? They're obviously very fragile.
They're fragile, but then they're easily preserved, I think, I feel, because they get forgotten, especially if they're unimportant. And then they're especially
Oh,
well
that why was
preserved
that so sad?
if they're unimportant.
It's like
Just cookware.
people just forget about
Cookware's
them.
my
They're in a pot,
favorite.
and
I have a special soft spot for pots that no one thought would be important, and then they're there in a museum a long time later. But
mhm.
then the flip side is the pots that were incredibly important because pottery was often used as in the form of urns. It has been preserved as well as people could. They were trying to preserve it. If you have an urn down there in a burial,
Yeah,
it's
okay,
gonna be it's gonna be loved, and oftentimes full of gubbins, full of treasures, which would probably help with the. And then the earth comes down, and so on and so forth.
yeah,
So there's quite a lot of that stuff. Also, if you take amphora, for example, they were traveling by sea a lot, and if the ship wrecks when it's full of wine or olive oil, then down they go, and they just sit at the bottom of the sea, and there's no reason for them to break down too much.
hmm,
So we have
oh,
quite good examples of those.
perfect. So, do you when you look at stuff to incorporate into what you do, are you looking at the shapes or the designs on them, and are there a lot of like highly decorative stuff? Because
Yeah.
obviously you do like a lot of like you. I know you use like stamps and like and obviously carvings into them. Is that a common way, or would most of it be painted on?
Really depends. Pottery has been, an activity that a peasant has to get done in a bit of spare time to knock a cow into it, ranging from that to prized goods or yeah, a burial urn or something. And it really depends on what the use of that pot was. They're very versatile, obviously. They're quite essential to how we are and how we live. But yeah, if you take a black figure vase, for example, like an ancient Greek one, they're
Hmm.
highly decorative. They must have taken a long time to produce, and they will have all sorts of wacky scenes on them of crazy parties that look like they went on till the small hours.
Hmm.
And
Oh,
and on the flip side of that, you can have just any cup.
at what stage would you? Because I think from again for most people listening, when they think of a Greek, I'm going to call it an orgy vase. I don't know if that's the term, but that's what I'm going with. At what point would they have been? Because is that painted on there? So would that be painted on
Hmm.
before the kind of
It's really
glaze?
cool. It's a whole process. It seems like when I was telling you earlier, I fire my pots once, then I glaze them, then I fire them again. It seems like sometimes with these black figure vases, there would be 3 stages or more of firing them to get them done in different ways. I think I'm correct in saying that some of them would have been done at the slip stage. So you take your cheese dry clay pot that has not been fired,
Is that the
and
technical term, or is that a your term?
that is a technical term. It's called
Oh,
cheeseware.
I love that.
The great thing about ceramics is you can add ware on the end of anything and it becomes technical. So
Okay, yeah.
I like to say that this is my um, Cornish ware, wizard ware,
Mhm.
handcrafted ware mug.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Just add,
love
just
it. Come on.
add, just add the wear on there. Yeah,
Add ware on the end and you're official.
it
Kent
sounds
ware,
like
that's
you
a
know what
thing.
you're talking about.
It's especially to do with how it's been decorated. For example, the you'll have whole cultures named after their pots, right? You've got the bell beaker culture, and they're called that because they had bell beakers. And you'll have comb-ware, and that's because it was their pots were decorated with a comb, or cordware because it was decorated with a cord. So when you have cheeseware, which is a pot that's cheese dry, and you dip it into a slip, you could brush that slip on instead of dipping it in. The slip is the watered down clay, normally of a different color that you would
Mhm.
use as a decoration to paint it on. So you could have a red pot and you could paint on the uh, black slip and then gently wipe away or scratch away the outside edge if you've gone over anywhere, and then illustrate into that, which I often do, and it's called sgraffito. But you can do it at different depths. It can be like a proper engraving, or it can just be a light scratch that takes away the slip from the outside, and that is how you can illustrate through the slip.
I
And
find
that's what they did.
I love learning new things because this is all something that I had no idea. I've seen people little videos on Instagram or the famous scene from Ghost where there's turning the little pots, but like all the stuff that goes with it, like I had no idea, and it just gives me such an appreciation for people that make things and the work that goes into it, and not just in modern times, but also like just throughout history, the amount of mistakes that must have been made for people to advance to the next thing and just become and refine it down and find a new way to do something. It's like, okay, well, we're doing it this way, but how do we get better? How do we get quicker? How do we make this so we can make more money? And it's kind of the same thing that we're all doing today. You know, at the end of the day, you make your um pottery, ceramics, pottery,
Pots.
bugs, pots, pots. Okay, I'm gonna go with a pot. Okay, pots. When you know you're making your pots to make money. That's the ultimate goal. So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
have
I'm
to,
completely a potter by trade. There is no other income, so there's no denying it. I need to make
yeah.
money.
So you have to you're doing the same thing that probably every day that they were doing, and that you have to try
Mm,
find a quicker way, a more efficient way, a cheaper way to kind of produce these and get them out to people and keep the quality and make the name. Because
yeah.
I assume that will have been the same thing, you know, throughout history when it comes to
Mm,
pottery. If you have one that you put some milk in it and it drinks all your milk, you're gonna be like, well, I don't want a potter from this, uh, you know,
yeah,
from this person.
definitely. I actually struggle with that balance because I think there's you can have an approach to pottery. People can still be potters, full-time potters. People make bread and butter from being potters. But as you say, there are all those things you're trying to cut down on how much time you spend, and you're trying to cut down on anything that doesn't sell really fast and well. And I think that can also be quite limiting, or it can tailor pots for sure, so that you end up with this sort of craft potter look. And it is a really difficult balance to maintain to keep producing some of the more detailed work that I do and have like hold faith that that's worth the learning time, because
Mhm.
I could probably make more money if I just made the same thing that I know sells over and over and
Yeah.
over. But it's just there's that
I
urge.
completely, I completely
Yeah.
understand that because I've carved probably hundreds of Helmavor and Vegvisir horns because they're
Mm,
so popular and they're what people like. And sometimes I wonder whether I like as much as I love what I do and I do love like every horn I carve. It's my like little happy place. Like I enjoy doing it. It clears my mind. I get it. I get to just kind of be at my desk, I completely clear my mind and I have all my best ideas there. So it doesn't really matter what I'm carving. But sometimes it annoys me that I don't get the time to just do things that I want to do. I don't get time to do the designs I want to do unless somebody commissions something. I'm kind of just stuck doing what people buy. And that's because obviously I've had to make this into a business and I've had to make it financially viable. And I've gone down that route where, we have a website and people can buy what they want to buy. And at the end of the day, I have to make it. Um,
yeah, definitely. If
so
you're,
yes,
yeah,
it's that balance where when you really love what you do, you want to just kind of have fun with it too sometimes, but you don't get the chance and you have to kind of just figure it out.
if you're if you're a creative person and self-employed, I think there's this feeling, it's kind of true, that you have no free time. So you
Yeah.
have to just prioritize something, don't you? And sometimes if that is just playing, it's hard to put a value on it and to see it as worth something. And yet, through playing, you might actually discover something that's incredibly profitable. So it's
Hmm.
always worth it. And also just regain your energy and your sort of passion for what you do.
Yeah.
It's always worth it, but it doesn't feel like it, especially if
Hmm.
it's like, oh, today I just want to make a little clay dog.
Yeah. Well, that's the
You know,
thing.
it's like,
You have all the time to just kind of play when you're starting out because you're not getting
mm,
that many orders. You're new, so you get to just do what you want to do. You get to play. You get to try and put things out into the world, and some things are gonna stick, some things aren't, and you kind of experiment. But then when you start to become more established and start getting people wanting your stuff, you're like, oh, now I have to start making the things that people want, and you get the less time to kind of play and do the things you want to do. And yeah,
uh,
it is frustrating.
it's frustrating, but it's also such a blessing
Well,
that
yeah,
they
because
do want it.
yeah,
And
absolutely, exactly.
at a time when you first made that thing, you grow tired of it. Like when you're making the hundreds, you're like, okay, I'm quite bored of this mug. But
Mhm.
like at a time when you first created it, it's because you saw something in it that you wanted to create. And I
Mhm.
think you can refine that as well. Like for me, I've gone through the board stage. It's actually tankards. I got kind of bored of making tankards. And then I've gone through it again. I'm like, no, I like them now.
Yeah, yeah,
You come out the other end.
yeah. It's sometimes you've got to remember that when you first made that tankard, you would absolutely kill to be like, oh, I need to make hundreds of these. Like
Mm-hmm.
you would be like, oh, I would fucking love if I got to a stage where I was making hundreds of these. But then when you get there, you're like, oh fuck me, I'm sick of making these tankers now. So it's you have to kind of remember the journey a little bit. And I think with me, if somebody commissions something that I really like, I'm a sucker for being like doing it a lot cheaper. So anybody listen to this, if they ever want like anything really cool making, and you are not in there, so I assume you're probably going to agree with me on this. If somebody comes to me with like a really cool custom idea and I just like it, I always do it cheaper, and not on purpose, but it's just like I just really
Yeah,
want to. I want the I guess the privilege to be able to make something that I really want to make, but also get paid for it. And you kind of lose oh, I don't need to make maybe as much because I just really want to make this really cool thing. So I'm just gonna do it less.
definitely. I'm a sucker for sentiment as well. If it's a sweet gift,
Yeah. Oh
it
yeah,
got
yeah.
me.
Yeah. But, okay. Before we wrap up this
Mhm.
and we jump over and let the patrons ask and we take an in-depth look at kind of how you do things. You just said that like the sentiment things, and you've mentioned urns. a few times. Is that something that you get asked to do quite often, or is that something that you do? Because it seems like obviously historically urns would have been used as made from pot, and I guess that does hold such a sentimental thing when somebody comes to you and says, because I've had it out of horn where it's not. I imagine it's a lot less common than probably you get asked, but I've had people say, like, a loved one's passed away, or sometimes pets, and like, do you think you could make like a really nice horn and with like a lid, and that I would love it to be like their urn. And there is like this connection that you get to it, and you want to do your best for it.
Yeah. So I have made urns. I've also made pots that I never intended to be urns, and then the customer has written and let me know that they've used it as an urn.
Okay, yeah.
And that's the times that they've written and let me know. So there is this feeling that if I make a pot with a lid, or a pot that I can see could have that function, when it sells, I know that it might be used as an urn. And I feel very honored. The first time that happened, and somebody said they're buying it, but also they're going to use it as an urn, I suppose actually I was uncomfortable because I had already made it. So I didn't know if I had put the right sentiment into it. And I was like trying to remember making it. And I was like, oh, I don't know, was I in the right headspace for that to be an urn?
Okay, yeah.
But it's really on their end, isn't it? It's what do they receive and how do they feel about it? But I also think that the way that I create my pots out here is quite, I don't know what I would change, if
Yeah.
it were an urn or not, because there is also a ceremony to drinking your morning coffee every day, and that just because you do it every day, it's not valuable in its own way as well. And I like to think that when somebody has their morning coffee from a cup that I've made it and thought about the way they're going to hold it and the way it's going to be as their morning coffee. So I don't know. I don't know if I would change anything when it's an urn or when it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's beyond my control because they already buy it.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's fair enough. Because yeah, it is one of those things as a creative, I guess, that you do sometimes get asked to make these things, and I always feel I would say mine is more wedding things, which is I guess is a little bit of a nicer situation. I get asked a bunch like, would I make like a horn for somebody's wedding? They're going to use it in the ceremony, and like I love that, and like I'll put extra effort into it, and it's just I feel so special for that situation. And one that always sticks with me was a lady um bought a horn for her son, and so her husband, his dad had passed away, and she like bought a horn for her son. And I remember like I was like, oh, like this is such a lovely thing. Like, what am I gonna do? So I ended up reading through like a lot of the Havamala and finding like this really lovely quote, and like translating it and carving it in there. And it felt like it's still to this day like one of my absolute favorite horns I've ever made, because it just had this such like little scent. I'm like welling up just like talking about it, because it was like such sentimental little thing that I got to have this play this role and this part in this like little this child's life. And like I got like a pit his mum sent me a picture with it after, and it's like such a beautiful thing that you get to do as a creator. And it's like such a nice moment that I guess we get to share.
I love that my customers they do quite often send me a picture of them having a cup of tea in it, and or whatever. Maybe at Christmas time, sometimes I've got pictures of the box because I have recognizable packaging, and so people that have bought a few before, it's like they know what it is because it's got my stamp that I made from wood on the outside and things like this. And people send me a picture of it under the Christmas tree, and I'm just like, hey, I'm there with them at Christmas in
Yeah,
my
it's
own
lovely.
way.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, let's wrap this up. Let's patrons ask you some questions, and we'll look at like the more in-depth side of how you do your things, and you can show us some of the some of the items. So yeah, where would you like to send people to find your work? What's your Instagram handle, or what's the best place? Do you have is it do you have your own website, or is it just through Etsy at the minute?
I have a website, but I'm in charge of keeping it up to date, and I
Okay,
wouldn't trust
that
me with
face
that.
said everything.
Yeah. Probably Instagram, because at the top there's also the link to my Etsy, which I can't be bothered to say the name of my Etsy because I don't know. But my Instagram handle is Karncreft, KARNKREFT. Did you see the dyslexic struggles on the
Hmm.
expression of like spelling aloud?
If
So
okay, so if people type that into Etsy, they're gonna find
it's
your.
just me, yeah,
Okay,
probably, and in
okay.
Instagram too. It's I've been told recently actually that if you put those two words the other way around, then in German it's nuclear power, which isn't my vibe, but
Oh,
it's too late now.
it's well. Where did the name come from?
So those are Cornish words, and Carn means a hill with lots, and craft means craft or trade. And I chose Cornish words because I am based in Cornwall. I grew up in Cornwall, and my pottery is on a big hill. So I am
Oh,
crafting on the hill, and that is hillcraft.
perfect, wonderful.
Carn
Um,
craft. That's right, the person who commented it.
there we go. Um, Barry, Barry in the chat. It's just above you. Demery got it right. Okay, yeah. Rose, thank you very much. This has been lovely. I think this embodies exactly what we want the creator episodes to be. We just get to talk about something that most people listening aren't gonna know, and really get a new appreciation for how people do what they do and the efforts that go into it. So thank you very much for spending the time with us. And
Thank you
let's
for having me, and thank you for your lovely Patreons, because I see their comments popping up, and there's some lovely ones.
Yeah, well, we're gonna let them ask you some questions. So if you do want to hear more from Rose, if you've enjoyed this episode, or if you've enjoyed pretty much any episode we do, we always do a Q&A after, but we always do an extended one with the creators. You can get them on the Patreon. Like I said, it's Patreon/Nordic Mythology Podcast. If you want to follow us, it's Nordic Mythology Podcast across the board, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And then if you want to follow me, it's Daniel_Farrand1. And obviously the business is at Horns of Odin. And yeah, let's wrap this up, and let's ask people let people ask you some questions. I've done so well, and then I fluffed the very last line.
It's okay, it's their turn. They were supposed to say that.
Yeah.